years. This year's goal is to earn the Advanced Community Affairs Gold. Today's speech is out of the Interpretive Reading Manual. It'll be 5 to 7 minutes, and the name of the speech is The Most Famous Speech Ever Given.
One of the requirements to become an Eagle Scout is that you have to select a famous speech, explain why it is famous, and whether or not it's still relevant today. And I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and by far the most common speech that I hear in this requirement is the Gettysburg Address, famous, followed closely by Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. But 99 out of 100 times it's one of those two speeches that I'm referring to. On Lincoln's speech, believe it or not, no one knows exactly what was said that day. There are 5 known copies of the speech in Lincoln's handwriting, each with a slightly different text and name for the people who received them: Nicholas, Hay, Everett, Bancock, and Bliss. 2 copies were apparently written before being delivered on that day, one of which was probably the reading copy. The remaining ones were produced months later for soldier benefit events. Politics at work. Lincoln was out there reproducing his speech for fundraising efforts. Despite widely circulated stories to the contrary, the president did not dash off a copy aboard a train to Gettysburg. Lincoln carefully prepared his major speeches in advance. His steady, even script in every manuscript is consistent with the firm writing surface, not the notoriously bumpy Civil War area train rides. Additional versions of the speech appeared in newspapers of the day, feeding a modern-day confusion about what was actually said that day. There's just numerous copies of it out there. The Bliss copy, which Lincoln wrote in 1864, and this version has been most often reproduced, notably on the walls of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. It is named after Colonel Alexander Bliss, stepson of historian George Bancroft. Bancroft asked President Lincoln for a copy to use as a fundraiser for soldiers. However, because Lincoln wrote on both sides of the paper, the speech could not be reprinted. So Lincoln made another copy at Bliss's request. It is the last known written copy by Lincoln and the only one that he signed and dated. Today it is on display at the Lincoln Room of the White House. For me, one of the most timeless parts of the Gettysburg Address is that you can take this speech and you could go to Okinawa, Japan, to the military cemetery there. You could go to the battlefields in Normandy, France. You could go to Beirut, Lebanon. You could go over into Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, any one of those countries where there's a military cemetery, and you could give this speech today, and it would still have that same relevance to those veterans that fought, and it has the same meaning about how we should continue on in their memory. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do so. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot concentrate, we cannot hollow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here today, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they who fought here thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Abraham Lincoln, November 19, 1863.